Over the years, there have been certain people who literally believe that the Earth is flat. This is even despite the fact that satellite images have shown us that the sun is actually spherical. This has even led to a group called Flat Earthers, who refuse to believe that the Earth is spherical. Just as the Earth has been confirmed that it is spherical, so is the sun. The sun has also been proven to be that, but what if the sun was actually just a flat disk? What would happen? Well, stay tuned, as in today's video, we will take a look at what would happen if the sun became flat and the effects that it would have on the solar system. Now, we know for a fact that the sun is spherical. The shape is important to make it function like it does, and even the effect that it has on the orbits around it. Without the mass and electromagnetic radiation that comes from it, life would have a hard time coping with the new environment. In addition, if the heat were to die down, most of the planets would freeze over and even get to sub-zero temperatures like those found on Neptune and Uranus. The sun's presence and gravitational pull are important in keeping the planets in orbit. You could think of these two factors as the linchpin that keeps our solar system stable. This means that if the sun were to disappear, everything in the solar system, including planets, asteroids, and comets, would all fly off into far space. But the question is not a matter of whether the sun did not exist, but rather what would happen if the sun were to exist as a flat disk. Could this actually be? What would happen? What would the solar system be like? Now, believe it or not, at the beginning of the universe, the sun did start out flat. But how could this be? Well, the sun is said to have formed from a mass of interstellar gas and dust, all of which collapsed under its own gravity. Eventually, this cloud became flat and the sun formed in the middle. If the sun were to become flat now, we would have problems that are just simply unimaginable. For starters, the sun can be thought of as a nuclear reactor. It is constantly fusing hydrogen into helium. If a star were to run out of hydrogen to burn, the results would be devastating. The core would contract as the outer shell expanded. By the time we get to this, the sun would have already become a red giant. Depending on the type of star, there are a lot of things that could happen. If it was a main sequence star such as our own, it would collapse into white dwarfs before eventually cooling into black dwarfs. Eventually, a flat sun may run out of fuel to keep it burning. So let's take, for example, the outside of the sun that has been sliced away. This would eventually leave a flat plane. The hydrogen that fuses with the helium may eventually run out, rendering it insufficient. And if the shell were to expand, well, we would all be cooked. On the other hand, if this was done to the sun, it might lack enough mass to actually hold it together, and it would simply fall apart. Our beloved planet would become completely dark, and we would head back to the Ice Age. In the long run, all life would die, and there would be nothing left apart from buildings. However, if the sun were to retain significant mass while in this state, it would go back to its original spherical shape. Why all objects in space are round? Now, there is a reason for all the large objects in space, including planets, moons, and stars, being round. When they are round, the object's gravity will act equally at its edges in every direction, which means that all sides of the sphere are being pulled towards the center, hence keeping it stable and spherical. Now, even though the Earth seems to be pretty round, even with the tall mountains and deep trenches, it would feel relatively smooth if it were to be shrunk and placed in your hands. So what if the sun was flat? However, let's assume that the sun has now become flat and that it has in fact maintained this shape. The results would definitely be catastrophic. With the spherical shape of the sun, the heat and energy emerging from it are spread out in all directions at the same time. However, if it became flat, heat would mainly be given off in two directions, and these are the directions that the planes are facing. So right now, the sun takes about a month to complete one rotation, with the equator spinning faster than the poles. As it rotates, it heads in the same direction that the planets mainly orbit. This means that if the sun were flat and it continued its orbit and spinning at the same rate as the planes facing the planets, we could go for weeks without experiencing a full sun. Things would only get worse if the sun were to stop rotating entirely. This would mean that we would only get full sun twice a year. And if by some bad luck the flat planes of the sun face north and south, all we would ever see is the edge, which would appear as a slim vertical line of light in a completely dark sky. With the development of technology, we would at least use some electricity to light up our world. However, this will not increase the planet's temperature, as it would drastically drop. Eventually, we would experience an ice age that would only start melting when we experienced a full sun, and that is only if the flat surfaces orbited to face the planets. But if the sun's planes still face north and south, well, there would be no hope of ever getting out of the ice age. In the long run, our planet would be stuck in a loop of melting and freezing. However, this would happen to all the other planets as well. Others, like Venus, would cool down drastically. Each of the planets would receive very little light as compared to when the sun is spherical. This would not only have a devastating effect on our solar system, but the chances of life surviving would be very slim. Because of the effect of less sunlight, most of the life on Earth would start dying drastically. Since plants are at the base of the food chain, if something were to happen to them, the food chain would be broken. They need the sun to photosynthesize, and without it, they would all start withering away. With all the planets gone, herbivores now have nothing to eat. This means that they would die off in large numbers as they struggled to find some plants for their survival. Carnivores would be the next to die away since their prey is now reduced in number. This means they would also struggle to find an animal to kill. Since the temperature of the planet will have dropped to almost sub-zero temperatures, the water in the oceans will obviously freeze. This means that all the fish in the sea and oceans would be frozen to death. In return, any animal that depends on fish as food would die because, well, there would be no fish to eat. The entire ecosystem as we know it would be no more. Eventually, humans will start dying off also, since the food rations will become too low to feed the billions of people on the planet. But even if humans managed to find a solution to the drop in food rations, we would still suffocate because there would be no plants to use up the carbon dioxide piling up in the atmosphere. Eventually, this carbon dioxide would suffocate us. Most of life, though not all, would die in the Ice Age. There are some creatures known as tardigrades or water bears that are extremely tough to kill. These microscopic organisms can survive literally anything, from boiling heat to freezing cold temperatures. They can even survive in a vacuum. If the sun became flat, we would not continue orbiting the sun, but this would depend on the remaining mass of it. If the sun became flat and its gravitational pull were to become weaker and weaker, the planets would begin drifting away. The outer planets would be the first to fly away, followed by the inner planets. This is mainly because with the suns having little to no gravitational pull, the planets would no longer be constrained to their orbits, and they would therefore drift off in a straight line. If the flat sun were to retain its mass, it would be bigger than it is now. All this mass would now be spread over the flat planes of the sun. If these planes were to face us and we got full sun, it would most likely cover most of the sky. And if the flat sun continued to keep the planets in orbit, their orbits would be greatly altered. The possibilities for all the effects that the sun's becoming flat would have on our solar system are truly endless. There is no telling what catastrophe would occur. Because of that, we can only be left guessing what would happen if the sun became flat, as we appreciate the fact that it is spherical. So what do you think would happen if the sun all of a sudden became flat? Let us know in the comment section below and go through the channel for more videos like this. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time.